the foundation of human existence, has silently crumbled beneath our unsuspecting feet. Welcome to my philosophy channel. This video may be long, but if you stay until the end, you may finally understand why humanity is living through a hidden crisis. You will discover why meaning has quietly disappeared from our daily lives. You will finally realize why most people no longer know why they live, wandering aimlessly through a world stripped of its spiritual anchor. Chapter 1. The Collapse of Meaning. Over 100 years ago, a solitary German thinker wrote a sentence that acted as a ticking time bomb buried deep within the foundations of Western civilization. Friedrich Nietzsche did not write to entertain the masses. He wrote to diagnose a terrifying sickness that was slowly infecting the human soul. He declared that God was dead, and we were his murderers. This famous declaration was never intended as a joyful celebration of scientific triumph or atheistic liberation. Instead, it was a grim medical diagnosis of a catastrophic civilizational collapse. The concept of God was not merely a religious figure sitting in the clouds. God represented the ultimate anchor for human morality, the absolute guarantee of objective truth, and the unshakable foundation of human meaning. For thousands of years, humanity relied upon this grand narrative to survive the brutal suffering of physical existence. When disease struck, when famine devastated villages, or when cruelty seemed unbearable, people found deep psychological comfort in a divine plan. They endured immense earthly pain because they firmly believed in a heavenly reward. This spiritual architecture provided an infinite reservoir of mental resilience against despair. Then came the relentless march of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Charles Darwin shattered the beautiful illusion of divine creation, reducing human beings to mere biological accidents competing for survival. Isaac Newton explained the cosmos through cold mathematical laws, eliminating the need for a divine architect. Slowly and silently, the grand spiritual narrative was dismantled by the sharp scalpel of human reason. We arrogantly believed that rationality and technological progress would instantly free us from ancient superstitions. We thought that eradicating myths would elevate human consciousness to glorious new heights. Yet, in our desperate rush to crown science as the supreme authority, we completely failed to notice what we were destroying. We assassinated the highest value that kept the vast emptiness of the universe at bay. Nietzsche illustrated this terrifying reality through the parable of a madman. This madman runs into a crowded marketplace in the broad daylight, holding a lit lantern and frantically searching for God. The educated townspeople, who have long abandoned their faith, merely mock his frantic behavior. They do not comprehend the infinite gravity of what they have done by discarding their highest guiding principle. The madman asks them a chilling set of questions that echo through the centuries. How were we able to drink up the entire sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? He is asking how we plan to survive without a central gravitational force to guide our morality. Without a sun to revolve around, we are now plunging continuously through an infinite void. There is no longer any up or down, no absolute right or wrong, and no ultimate destination. We have been cut loose from the cosmic fabric, left to drift aimlessly in a cold and indifferent universe. The death of God is the birth of unbearable existential weight. Look closely at the pervasive anxiety that saturates our modern global society today. We possess unprecedented technological miracles, infinite information at our fingertips, and unimaginable material wealth. Yet, we are drowning in a collective epidemic of depression, burnout, and despair. This is the direct psychological consequence of living in a world where the highest values have completely devalued themselves, without any replacement. When you strip away the metaphysical guarantee of meaning, suffering transforms from a sacred trial into a meaningless biological accident. In the past, pain was a test of faith that tempered the soul. Today, pain is viewed merely as a senseless glitch in the system that must be numbed with medications, distractions, or mindless consumption. We have lost the ability to endure suffering. The most terrifying aspect of this civilizational collapse is that most people remain completely unaware of it. Nietzsche warned that the light from dead stars takes millions of years to reach human eyes. Similarly, the tremendous shockwave of God's death is still traveling through the corridors of human history. We are only now beginning to feel the tremors of this devastating spiritual earthquake. Because we refuse to acknowledge the collapse of our absolute foundation, we blindly wander into the dark valley of nihilism. Without a preordained purpose handed down from above, humanity faces a terrifying ultimatum. We must either perish under the crushing weight of total meaninglessness, or we must summon the unfathomable courage to become the absolute architects of our own human destiny. When the heavens finally fall silent, the only voice left to dictate meaning must come from within. Chapter 2. The Vacuum After Faith. The disappearance of the divine did not create freedom. It created a suffocating vacuum. When the ancient heavens finally emptied, humanity did not inherit a paradise of rationality. Instead, we inherited a devastating spiritual void. For centuries, the grand narrative of religion provided a flawless blueprint for human existence. It dictated the precise meaning of good and evil, the ultimate purpose of suffering, and the final destination of the soul. Suddenly, that blueprint was violently torn away by the hands of reason and science. Without the comforting gaze of a divine creator, the boundaries of morality instantly dissolved into subjective opinions. Why should we continue to be compassionate? Why should we endure pain without the guarantee of a heavenly reward? The objective rules of life evaporated. This sudden emptiness triggers a profound psychological crisis deep within the human mind. We are biologically and culturally programmed to seek order and meaning in a chaotic universe. When the universal anchor is lifted, we are seized by an overwhelming existential vertigo. We stare into the abyss of absolute freedom, and the vast emptiness terrifies us beyond comprehension. Look at the desperate mechanisms of our modern society. We frantically attempt to fill this terrifying vacuum with artificial substitutes. We worship the endless accumulation of wealth, the fleeting validation of social media, and the illusion of infinite technological progress. We have traded the sacred temple for the crowded shopping mall, bowing down to the gods of consumerism. Yet, these modern idols can never truly quench the deep spiritual thirst of the human soul. A high salary cannot answer the question of why you exist. A trending hashtag cannot provide comfort when you face the inevitable approach of death. We have replaced the eternal with the disposable, masking our deepest anxieties with relentless entertainment. Friedrich Nietzsche understood that science could only explain how the universe functions. It could never tell us why we should continue to live within it. Reason is a cold and indifferent tool, completely incapable of generating moral warmth or existential purpose. When reason destroys faith without building a replacement, it leaves humanity bleeding in a barren wasteland. A mind deprived of a highest value will eventually devour itself in the dark. Chapter 3. The Birth of Nihilism. The human soul is a furnace that cannot survive without the fuel of meaning. Introduce nihilism not as a mere philosophical theory, but as a devastating psychological sickness. When the ancient values finally collapse, the immediate result is never glorious freedom. Instead, a creeping and unbearable coldness paralyzes the human spirit. You look up at the magnificent night sky and suddenly feel absolutely nothing but complete and utter emptiness. Human beings are the only biological creatures on Earth that desperately require a concrete reason to endure physical and emotional suffering. A wild animal suffers in silence and simply attempts to survive the day. A human being suffers and violently demands to know why. Without a purpose, our pain transforms into an unbearable and senseless accident. Friedrich Nietzsche diagnosed this pervasive nihilism as the ultimate unspoken crisis of the modern age. It is the silent and terrifying guest standing patiently at the door of our global civilization. It softly whispers that all human effort is ultimately pointless. Every grand achievement and every single tear shed will eventually turn to dust in a cold universe. Look closely at how we frantically run upon the modern treadmill of instant gratification. We scroll endlessly through glowing digital feeds, seeking tiny bursts of chemical pleasure to distract our minds from the yawning void. We relentlessly consume artificial products we do not actually need, desperately attempting to buy our way out of deep existential dread. The descent into this darkness begins with a terrifying realization of absolute cosmic insignificance. You wake up in the middle of the quiet night, staring blankly at the bedroom ceiling. You suddenly realize that the unforgiving universe does not care if you live or die. Your deepest anxieties and proudest achievements mean absolutely nothing to the silent stars. We must carefully distinguish between different reactions to this void. Passive nihilism occurs when humanity simply surrenders completely to the crushing emptiness. Instead of forging brave new values, we sink into a comfortable and pathetic depression. We arrogantly declare that since nothing truly matters, we should just numb ourselves with cheap pleasures and avoid all difficult struggles. We foolishly believe that rapid technological progress has somehow cured our invisible spiritual sickness. We construct towering skyscrapers made of gleaming glass and solid steel, yet our internal psychological architecture is quietly crumbling into dust. We possess powerful devices that connect us instantly to the entire globe, yet we have never felt more profoundly isolated and lost. True nihilism represents the ultimate and most brutal test of human psychological endurance. It is a terrifying and barren desert that every single awakening mind must eventually cross. You cannot conveniently bypass this desert. You must walk directly into the scorching heat of absolute meaninglessness. Only then can you begin to forge a radically new existential path. To survive the barren desert of nothingness, you must courageously become the oasis it desperately needs. Chapter 4: The Rise of the Last Man. Comfort, safety, and the death of ambition is the final resting place of a degenerate civilization. After the spiritual anchor of the divine is violently severed, humanity does not automatically rise to new heights of greatness. Instead, most people sink into a pathetic state of existential stagnation known as the last man. This is the most despicable version of humanity, a creature that has completely abandoned the painful pursuit of higher meaning in favor of petty comfort. The last man is defined by an absolute avoidance of risk and a total fear of any physical or emotional suffering. He no longer desires to overcome himself or create new values for the future of the species. He only wishes to stay in the safe middle ground, avoiding both the peaks of greatness and the deep valleys of despair. These individuals have invented a shallow concept of happiness that is measured merely by the absence of discomfort. They seek a constant temperature in their homes, a steady supply of mindless entertainment, and a life free from any significant spiritual struggle. They mistake a lack of conflict for the presence of true human fulfillment and lasting joy. Observe the way the last man interacts with the world through a constant and self-deprecating blink. This blink is a symbol of their cynical refusal to take any existential question seriously or with sincerity. They mock those who still possess great ambitions, using sarcasm as a psychological shield to hide their own profound internal emptiness from the light. In our modern digital era, the last man finds absolute solace in the endless stream of passive and cheap entertainment. He consumes massive quantities of mindless content to numb the growing void within his own fragmented soul. He has replaced the courageous act of living with the cowardly act of merely observing others exist from a safe distance. The rise of this passive nihilism represents the final expiration of the human will to truly grow and excel. When a population is satiated by cheap pleasures and artificial security, it loses the vital energy required for great historical change. The last man is the ultimate end of history, a biological machine operating without a soul or purpose. A humanity that only seeks to be comfortable is a humanity that has already forgotten how to breathe. Chapter 5. The Three Transformations. To evolve beyond the passive herd, the human spirit must undergo three agonizing metamorphoses. The journey of spiritual awakening begins with the form of a camel. The camel is a creature that willingly kneels down, desperately begging to bear the heaviest possible burdens. In our modern society, the camel represents the obedient citizen who blindly follows the script of life. You go to school, you secure a stable job, and you absorb the moral weights handed down by your parents and cultural traditions. We arrogantly confuse this exhausting obedience with genuine moral virtue. The camel believes that enduring pain for the sake of tradition makes it holy. Yet, this is merely a psychological defense mechanism designed to avoid the terrifying responsibility of absolute freedom. By carrying the weights imposed by others, we conveniently excuse ourselves from the brutal task of figuring out what we actually value deep within our own souls. But when the exhausted camel wanders deep into the solitary desert of existential crisis, a violent transformation occurs. The spirit suddenly morphs into a ferocious lion. The lion refuses to carry the luggage of the past and demands absolute sovereignty. It encounters a massive dragon covered in golden scales, with every single scale shining with the words "Thou shalt." This dragon represents 2,000 years of imposed objective morality. The lion utters a mighty and terrifying declaration of "I will," violently tearing the golden scales from the dragon of tradition. This represents the rebellious phase of human psychology, where we violently reject societal expectations and institutional religions. However, the lion suffers from a tragic and fundamental limitation. The fierce beast possesses the immense power to destroy old values, but it utterly lacks the capacity to create beautiful new ones. Therefore, the spirit must undergo one final and miraculous metamorphosis. The ferocious lion must quietly transform into an innocent child. Why must the spirit become a child? Because a child represents a sacred forgetting, a flawless new beginning, and a self-propelling wheel. A child does not harbor the resentment of the rebel or the exhaustion of the burden carrier. The child simply plays, imposing its own joyful rules upon reality. To truly escape the suffocating grip of modern nihilism, you must eventually learn how to play seriously again. You must shed the crushing weight of dead traditions and the bitter anger of endless rebellion. You must become the supreme architect of your own universe, joyfully dictating what is good and what is evil without begging for external validation. You must say a sacred yes to your own uncharted life. A spirit that can only obey or destroy will never know the supreme joy of pure creation. Chapter 6. The Courage to Say No. True freedom demands the absolute courage to reject the comfort of obedience. Human beings are deeply programmed to seek approval and avoid social exile. From the moment of birth, we are wrapped in the heavy chains of cultural expectations and imposed morality. We are taught exactly what is good and what is evil, never questioning the authority of the invisible rule makers. We accept the dragon of tradition because it offers us psychological safety within the herd. Friedrich Nietzsche brutally exposed this dynamic by distinguishing between master morality and slave morality. Master morality is born from strength, celebrating vitality, courage, and the bold creation of values. It is the natural expression of a flourishing spirit. Slave morality, however, is born from fear and resentment. The weak, unable to exert their own power, cleverly redefine their inherent cowardice as the ultimate moral virtue. Under the disguise of slave morality, obedience becomes piety, and weakness translates into goodness. The herd uses guilt as a weapon to punish anyone who dares to stand above the crowd. When we internalize these subjugating values, we voluntarily become our own wardens. We relentlessly police our deepest desires and spontaneous ambitions, terrified of breaking the sacred illusions that keep the fragile society together. To escape this psychological prison, the spirit must summon the ferocity of the lion and dare to utter a resounding no. Saying no is not simply a teenager's empty rebellion. It is a profound act of existential reclaiming. It is the willingness to stare into the eyes of the dragon and reject the sacred words of "thou shalt." It requires immense solitude and unflinching resolve. Look at the modern landscape of performative virtue and endless social policing. We constantly curate our identities to appease the judgment of nameless strangers online. We trade our authentic drive for the cheap dopamine of collective approval. We remain desperately afraid of standing alone in the cold wind of our own unfiltered truth. We prefer the warm illusion of the comforting prison cell. A mind that cannot say no will forever remain a slave to the demands of the crowd. Chapter 7. The Power Behind All Things. The invisible engine that drives the entire universe is not the desire to survive, but the burning hunger to expand. When we look at the natural world, we are often told that every living creature is driven merely by the instinct to survive. We believe that life is simply a desperate struggle to avoid death. But Friedrich Nietzsche radically redefined the core drive of biological and psychological existence. He declared that life does not merely want to preserve itself. Life desperately wants to overcome itself and expand its dominance. This relentless and burning drive is what he called the will to power. It is crucial to understand that this is not about political oppression or tyrannical control over other human beings. It is the raw, creative energy that forces a tiny seed to smash through solid concrete seeking the sunlight. It is the instinct of all living things to grow, flourish, and continuously push beyond their given limits. Consider the modern human condition, where we have utterly misunderstood this fundamental force. We confuse the will to power with the shallow accumulation of financial wealth, social status, or corporate titles. We believe we are exercising power when we dominate an argument or buy a luxurious product to impress a nameless crowd. Yet, these are merely the pathetic actions of a weak spirit seeking external validation from the herd. True power is an intensely internal phenomenon. It is the breathtaking capacity to endure tremendous suffering and alchemize that deep pain into profound creative output. When you push your physical body to its absolute breaking point, not to show off to others, but to experience the ecstasy of breaking your own boundaries, you are tapping into this primordial energy. The will to power is the relentless drive towards self-mastery. We have been domesticated by a culture that fears this raw vitality. Modern society demands that we numb our ambitions, prescribing medications and distractions to keep us manageable and placid. We channel our natural aggression into harmless digital games or endless social scrolling, bleeding out our life force in microscopic drops. When your life no longer produces new value, your will to power has effectively flatlined. To reclaim this divine energy, you must view every single obstacle as an invitation to evolve. You must treat your own personality as a block of rough marble, willingly suffering the brutal strikes of the chisel to carve out a masterpiece. You do not withdraw from the chaotic game of life. You enter the arena deliberately, seeking out resistance because resistance is the only mechanism that generates genuine strength. A life that merely seeks to survive is a life that has already begun to rot from the inside. Chapter 8. The Illusion of Modern Happiness. The modern definition of happiness is nothing more than a carefully engineered anesthetic. Observe the tragic illusion that currently dominates our global society. We have completely equated true human fulfillment with the relentless consumption of material goods and mindless entertainment. We worship at the altar of convenience, believing that a life devoid of struggle is the ultimate definition of success. We have designed a world that protects us from every hardship, yet leaves us spiritually starving. Friedrich Nietzsche accurately predicted this spiritual degradation when he described the last man. These individuals proudly declare that they have invented happiness, but their happiness is merely the absolute absence of pain. They sit in temperature-controlled rooms, passively consuming digital spectacles on glowing screens, deliberately numbing their conscious minds. They desperately avoid any encounter with deep silence because silence forces them to hear their own internal emptiness. What happens when we systematically eliminate all risk and suffering from the human experience? We simultaneously eliminate the essential conditions required for genuine greatness and self-overcoming. When everything is instantly available with a simple click, the concept of earning your desires entirely disappears. We become pampered pets in a luxurious societal zoo, mistaking our comfortable captivity for absolute freedom and lasting peace. Ask yourself honestly about the pleasures you chase every single day. Do they elevate your soul, or do they merely sedate your yawning existential anxiety? We scroll through infinite algorithms until the early hours of the morning, gorging on cheap dopamine hits that leave us feeling exhausted and hollow. We are so terrified of boredom and despair that we voluntarily trade our precious life force for momentary distractions. True joy is never found in the pathetic avoidance of resistance. Authentic happiness occurs only when you voluntarily endure tremendous pressure to give birth to a dancing star within your own soul. It requires you to embrace the necessary pain of growth, turning the suffering of mortal existence into a glorious work of art. You must reject the artificial comforts that secretly poison your greatest potential. A soul sedated by endless entertainment will die long before the physical body finally fails. Chapter 9. Standing on the Edge. True freedom is not a gentle breeze, but a terrifying abyss that demands you jump. When you finally abandon the comfort of the herd and reject the artificial safety of modern society, you will find yourself standing on the absolute edge. Friedrich Nietzsche described human existence as a fragile rope tied between the animal and the Overman. This rope is suspended over a massive, yawning abyss. To move forward requires embracing ultimate danger, while looking down invites complete psychological paralysis and paralyzing dread. We are biologically wired to crave solid ground and predictable outcomes. When we realize that there are no divine safety nets, the weight of absolute responsibility crushes our fragile egos. We experience the terrifying vertigo of true freedom. We suddenly understand that every single choice we make has irreversible consequences, and we have absolutely no external authority left to blame for our inevitable tragedies or epic failures. In our modern world, we have constructed elaborate societal guardrails specifically designed to keep us far away from this frightening edge. We purchase expensive insurances, choose highly predictable career paths, and surround ourselves with echo chambers that endlessly validate our existing beliefs. We have systematically eradicated the noble concept of existential risk, preferring to rot slowly in absolute safety rather than dare to fly and potentially fall. This cowardly avoidance explains why so many individuals feel profoundly dead inside their own bodies. You cannot possibly experience the intoxicating thrill of authentic living if you never put your precious comfort on the line. Greatness always requires staking your entire being upon a single, uncertain throw of the dice. Those who desperately cling to the ground will never comprehend the majestic view from the dangerous heights. To walk across this treacherous rope, you must keep your eyes fixed firmly on the ultimate horizon. You must willingly accept the very real possibility of catastrophic destruction. The journey toward the Overman is not a pleasant evening stroll. It is a brutal and terrifying tightrope walk where every step demands unwavering focus and unflinching courage. You must learn to love the searing wind of absolute danger. A soul terrified of falling will never discover that it secretly possesses the power to fly. Chapter 10. Becoming the Overman. To become the Overman is to become the supreme architect of your own meaning in a meaningless universe. We have walked through the scorching desert of nihilism and stood upon the terrifying edge of the abyss. We have witnessed the cowardly retreat of the last man and the agonizing metamorphoses of the human spirit. Now, we finally arrive at the ultimate destination of Friedrich Nietzsche's immense philosophical vision. We encounter the magnificent and terrifying figure of the Overman, the ultimate creator of new values. The Overman is not a biological evolution or a hero possessing supernatural physical strength. He is the ultimate psychological triumph over the crushing weight of existential despair. When the Overman realizes that the universe is fundamentally silent and devoid of objective meaning, he does not collapse into depression. Instead, he rejoices, realizing that this absolute emptiness is actually a blank canvas waiting for his masterpiece. Look around at our modern world, full of echo chambers and manufactured desires. Society desperately wants you to remain A predictable cog within its massive industrial machine, the Overman radically rejects this pre-packaged existence. He refuses to inherit his morality from ancient texts or trending social media algorithms. He forges his own imperative, acting as his own supreme judge in the court of life. To truly embody this sovereign state, you must pass the ultimate existential test, known as the eternal recurrence. Imagine a demon whispering that you must relive your exact life, with every single pain and joy, repeated infinitely. The weak would scream in absolute terror at this crushing destiny. But the Overman embraces it with radical joy, because he has lived so authentically that he welcomes the eternal loop. We have traveled together through the collapse of ancient faith, the sickness of nihilism, and the disastrous illusion of modern comfort. Now, you finally possess the necessary philosophical blueprint to awaken from your dogmatic slumber. If this deep journey has ignited a powerful spark within your soul, please subscribe to my philosophy channel and share this message with others who relentlessly seek the truth. The old gods have crumbled into dust, and the terrified herd is blindly marching toward the void. If there is no given meaning waiting for you at the end of life, will you dare to create one yourself? A life without preordained meaning is the ultimate invitation to become a creator.